Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an episode of the Artenders with Mac and Dan. I am Dan, he is Mac.
Hi.
And this time we'll be looking at a show, an anime, titled Akame ga Kill. It was an anime that was released particularly in the US in 2015 and 2016, and it was actually an adaptation of a manga that was published by Square Enix, which is really funny to bring up because we looked at Dragon Quest, the very first one, a few weeks ago.
Really?
Which was published by Square.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Small world. Anyways, and we are actually also hot off the heels of an interview that we conducted with the wonderful woman who played Akame in the show, Molly Searcy.
Yeah, and honestly, the interview was fantastic, and if you haven't listened to it before listening to this, go listen to that, because she's more eloquent than the two of us combined.
That is for sure.
Absolutely genius. But in terms of the actual conversation about the show, because we talked a lot about process with her, we talked a lot about her work with her, and her life as an actress. We are here, though, to talk about the show itself,
yes.
Our opinions on the show, what the actual show itself was like. And I'm going to start off with this. This is a logistics question.
Okay.
And it absolutely boggled my mind. So the original show was in Japanese.
Yeah.
Yet... And so then I'm left to believe, okay, so then that means that the whole, all the animation and everything that you see on screen was originally Japanese as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yet everything in the background is in English.
Not everything.
A lot of things in the background. I mean, obviously, like the credits and everything are in Japanese.
Yeah.
But there are bags of sugar that across them in perfect English say white sugar.
All right, hold on. Well,
there are books that have English titles, and I'm like, did someone redo that?
No. So this is a common thing that happens with a lot of not just anime, but video games too.
This is why you're here, for the conventions, please.
Well, they'll incorporate English phrases and words, right? So I mean, let's say you're playing a fighting game, like Street Fighter, that is made in Japan, right? And you just beat your opponent in a match. What does it end with? KO. That's not Japanese.
Yeah, it's not.
Right. There are constantly things that that Japanese culture take from English culture, particularly language, that they'll just implement into sometimes the games or the anime. For the most part, though, there was a lot of times in this anime in particular that we would see phrases or words that are written in Japanese that luckily in subtitles it was given to us in English, like the thoughts of an adolescent boy that Tatsumi goes through.
Oh,
but just say very briefly that what this show is about, if you don't know, Akame ga Kill follows this group of assassins who are going against this evil empire. And it's actually a very, very cool and interesting world, and the most nerdy of worlds I think we've come across, but definitely one of the most fun, where 1,000 years ago, this empire made 48 imperial arms, which are all these crazy weapons, and of course, everybody fights with these imperial arms, and so the anime, and I assume the manga too, becomes this insane sort of power trip and fantasy. Mm-hmm. And it is a fun watch, but I want to get your first impressions of the show, Mac, because forgive me if I'm wrong, it was your students, or at least one of your students that sort of suggested this show and propelled you to pick this show.
So there's a student pretty early on who suggested that we watch the show, that we review it, and I kind of put it on the back burner for a while until I started bringing it up with other students, and then realizing that this was something that a lot of my students had watched before and really enjoyed. And so my expectations were okay, this is going to be a young teen drama, and that's where I'm going to keep my expectations. Mm-hmm. And I would say it definitely met those. It might even exceeded them. Yeah, truly. I think that it was... the main thing is that it was an incredibly fun show. I really liked the fact that they... a big thing with the show was pacing. I really liked the pace at which people thought. You know what I mean by that?
Go on.
So, for instance, I know this is a normal anime thing, but it really was very exciting to me. That like mid-fight, as they're in the middle of a move, it's almost like time stops, like mid-swing, and you can hear all their thoughts and everything like on the moves that they're about to complete and whatnot.
Right.
And also, like whenever they would give voiceovers and whatnot, it's almost like time would slow down, and it made me happy because I was like, yeah, that is kind of the pace at which people think, isn't it? People think a lot faster than voiceovers. People think a lot faster than we talk.
It's just we don't think in words, right? Like in those moments, we're just going off instinct. But if those instincts and those thoughts were put into words, those words would be what they would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I really, really, really loved about the show is that it constantly took popular conventions and it broke them.
Okay,
or
such
it
as?
used them in entirely different ways, which are not necessarily common. So, like, it's not incredibly normal traditionally to have two-part episodes. And only recently, in the past, like, 20 or 30 years, has it become normal for series to have two-part episodes, or, like, two episodes that are the same arc.
Yeah.
And almost all the time, nowadays, I've never seen a two-parter in the middle of a season.
Oh, it's a common thing that happens
anime?
with a lot of anime. Yeah,
Okay. That was wild for me.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, it's very common to see two-part episodes at the end.
Yeah.
Or two-part episodes at the beginning. I've never seen a two-part episode like smack dab in the middle. That was really weird.
So usually for a lot of anime that particularly... I mean, this really goes for anime that's only like 20-something episodes long, or maybe 30-something episodes long, but usually like the halfway point it's kind of the climax, and it becomes this big turning point for a lot of the characters and the plot of the show. So a lot of storytellers like to take that opportunity to like, okay, this is really important right here, right now. This is when everything changes for these characters. Yeah. Now, with that being said, too, I really want to get out on the front end that I think, like I said, the world that this show, and by extension, the manga created, is a very, very fun world. It's a very interesting world, a very cool world, and I loved the sort of exploration by this world, in this world, and I want to thank the writer of the manga, Takahiro, which that's just what he's named, for creating such a vast, interesting world. And I think the quality of the animation is really, really clear, and beautiful too at so many points. And it makes for very, very engaging fight scenes. It was one of the issues that we came across when looking at the show Berserk, that even though the stills that they would use a lot were beautiful stills, right? But it was basically, that show was like a slideshow, and it was hardly in motion. Where in this show, so much of it is in motion.
Why didn't we say that then? A slideshow. That's a perfect.
I think we did. How do you not remember? I can't believe you.
Well, we talked about it like that.
Never.
Slideshow.
Don't talk to me. And now. So, and also, I think a lot of the actors in this show, including Molly Searcy, please check out that interview, I think do a really, really good job, and especially in the containers that they are put in terms of the characters of this show. Now, I am extremely disappointed by the storytelling of this show.
Sure.
I think it is easily the weakest part of the show. And I think largely it is because of the writing of the characters. I don't know how much of an issue this is in the manga, but I find this to be an issue in the anime. And so that's really only that we can, take into consideration. But there were so many times when I was confused because it felt like the show wanted me to care about a certain character and they're dying, and I'm like, I really don't care right now.
Yeah.
I'm not invested in who they are whatsoever. And even though I appreciate sometimes the bold choices of killing off a character, and you don't see that a lot in media, the sort of double-edged sword here is some of those characters, we didn't even have time to grow with them, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think the biggest thing that, and we're already getting into the specificity of it, but I think the biggest thing that this show does wrong to its characters, I think, is that almost every time you are introduced to a character in this show, which most of them are just archetypes and they don't really go beyond that, which is really disappointing.
Sure.
Because we as audience members like to see character development, and there are only a few in the show that I think actually gets real development that changes from beginning to the end. But I think my biggest thing is that when you're introduced to a lot of these characters, and there are a lot of characters in the show, it's fine. It is fine that there are a lot of characters. It is fine that we don't spend a lot of time with some of these characters, right? We talked about this briefly with The Wire that we reviewed last week, where there are so many characters that are only on screen for such a short amount of time, but those characters have so much life in them that you're like, oh, okay, so this is your MO. This is who you are, and this is how you serve the scene, and this is how you serve, the people around you. Because what they transcend is they're more than just characters, they're people, and we see the people and the humanity in those characters.
Because beyond the writers and the directors, the actors have so many non-verbals that they've already decided that the acting is what draws you to the character, not just what they tell you about.
Yes. And so the tricky thing for the actors here in this show too is that they are also constrained by like, oh, so this is how this character is drawn, this is how this character is animated. I can only do so much, right? I have no control to how the character looks, but I do have control into how the character sounds and, vocally and emotionally how this character approaches the scene. Now also, nearly every single time you're introduced to a new character in the show, or you spend some good amount of time with a character in the show, you get a backstory. So here's the thing. You don't need a backstory for every damn character. It riles me up so much because the big thing is like, okay. So maybe the counter argument is, well, we need the backstory, to really sympathize with the character. Now think about when you've met somebody. And, you're like, oh, hi. Okay, you're John. Nice to meet you, John. And then John just says to you, yeah, so if you want to get to know me, my father was killed. My mother was murdered right in front of me, actually. That was when I was born, that was the first thing I saw. My brothers, both of them, actually, my two brothers, were also executed, right there with poison, actually. They were choking on their blood. And
that was the first thing I saw.
Awful. It was awful. And now I'm here and now I'm happy. Thank God for these guys.
Sure.
That was almost every character, good or bad, in this show.
Yeah.
The thing that I wish, and I'm not a writer, I'm not gonna front that I am, but it's frustrating to see a show and be like, I could have done that better in terms of like the executing of sympathizing with a character, where you get to know the character, and the best way to know a character is know who they are.
Yeah.
And then you can also get invested later on with who they were. And then it becomes, oh, look how much this character has grown. Or you supply a character that doesn't really have a lot of backstory going into the show, Tatsumi.
Yeah.
And you have the sort of backstory actually happen during the show.
Yeah.
So you get invested with Tatsumi as much as he's getting invested with the going-ons of the show, right?
Sure.
So you're there for the discovery in the very first episode when Tatsumi sees his friends, one of them was already killed and the other one is in jail and dies in that moment, right? So you experience that with that character.
Sure.
Isn't that so much cooler than being told how a character feels 10 years ago about something? You get to discover with the character. That is so much more exciting than being told by other characters what they experienced. It's hard to sympathize with characters like that.
I love when you get riled. Yes.
I'm riled up because I see potential in the show.
Yes. So the speaking as a writer, I can definitely say with full confidence that there are more clever ways to do that. There are absolutely more.
And you don't need a backstory for every character.
Well,
You'd be surprised.
Also, you don't need explanation for every decision that is made.
Yes.
We were talking about that. So it's so frustrating. What we were saying earlier is that it feels like because it was a manga before it was an anime, it felt like the writers of the anime were reading the manga and read a line that like and it was something like, and in the middle of this battle, Mine realized that she needed to kick it into hyperdrive, because as you remember, her emotion controls
fuels her weapon.
Yeah, fuels her weapon. You
Which
do
is a really
not
cool
need
concept.
to. It's almost like the writer saw that and said, "Huh, yeah, I like that." Copy. Paste into dialogue that Mine says. So instead of her just being like, "Oh, I need to amp it up," and then her like see maybe like tears streaming down her face, and then she uses the weapon or whatever.
Yeah.
She has to say out loud, "Remember, my thing is that like my emotion."
Pumpkin powers up when I'm under high stress.
Yeah, and she's like, "Don't put me under high stress," and I'm feeling stressed. And
Every
then
scene, every time,
Yeah.
every fight.
And I'm like,
Mine
okay, we don't need
loves
it
to
every
remind
time.
you that her weapon powers up when she is under high stress or a high intense situation.
Yes.
Every time. Why? We didn't forget. It felt
Yeah.
like the writers were treating the audience as if they were idiots.
And well, because this is the thing. There's a difference between treating them like they are, treating them like they're idiots and treating them like they're not listening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like you can spoon feed an audience without giving them the same piece of fucking information like 60 times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they did. They just kept giving it to you. But yes, I'm so sorry.
Well, okay, listen, folks, audience. Mac and I are riled up because, like I said, the world is really cool.
Oh my God,
I think
yeah.
a lot of the actors did a great job.
Yeah.
Because we both watched the dub, we didn't watch the sub. And the quality of the animation is fantastic. And
The
I think for a
voices were
lot,
awesome.
and like the weapons are really cool. I think a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of the character designs really, really creative. But it doesn't go anywhere past there. And the big thing that I took away from this was, okay, so the folks doing the story, particularly this anime, are much more concerned with the battles and how cool it looks, as opposed to telling an impactful and it doesn't have to be an important story, but you gotta focus on telling a story, right? When you're designing a video game, for example, the priority should be like making it a fun video game to play, right? And so if the story takes a back seat, that's cool, because the focus should be making the game fun to play. When you're making a television show or a movie, the biggest thing that you need to focus on is the story and how these characters serve the story and the plot. And it was so clear that the storytelling in this show took a back seat. So I understand like the sort of draw that this show has to a lot of people, because it is an insanely creative and fun show. And it's cool to see these characters go into these battles and turn these situations around when the stakes are incredibly high. But the stakes are only incredibly high, like, to these characters and in those moments, but the stakes don't really feel high in the story. And so you're 6 episodes in, and Shell, one of the original characters in the assassin group, dies to this dog super weapon thing, which is really cute. It's actually kind of funny too. And she dies, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, I am supposed to be sympathizing and being distraught that we just lost Shell. We just lost an important character, not only to the team, but to the story. How are these characters going to deal with this, move on, not only emotionally, but physically in the space, meaning how are they going to approach future situations, these future missions as assassins? How are they going to do this? And I felt none of that, because, and it's not necessarily a time thing, where should we have spent more time with Shell? That's not really the issue. It's more so, how did we spend that time? And so a lot of the time with Shell was just her explaining her backstory. But I didn't get who she is. I got who she was. I didn't get who she is.
Right.
And there's only, for the actors and the directors, the voice directors, there's only so much they can do in those containers.
Yeah.
And they can provide as much life to these characters as they can, but it doesn't necessarily save the character. So I don't feel the importance of Shell. I don't feel the sort of distraught heartbreak that Mine goes through to see her friend get torn apart into like that.
Yeah.
I don't feel the distraught that other characters in the group feel, that they just lost one and there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah.
I wish I got more of that, but instead the show had such a high focus on battle. And so what the show needed to do then is, okay, if you're going to focus on the battles and have a battle every single episode, fine. But then there needs to be more storytelling in the battles.
Right.
Right? So maybe
like Avatar.
So why exactly? So why not have something? Let's just use Shell as an example again.
Yeah.
So the character that she was facing off against with the dog pet thing, Seiryu ubiquitous. So why not have it be more of an intense relationship? Why not make Seiryu more of like maybe Shell's childhood friend? Maybe just have more storytelling in the fight and more conflict personally for the characters within the fight. And then that can help with the storytelling.
Yeah.
I mean, another issue is that I don't think we spent enough time with the group together, actually living and breathing and being together. So much of it was, we have to plan for this thing. All right, we're going to go do this thing. And we didn't get enough of the group together. We got a few, and I'm going to give the show credit for that. But I wanted so much more for this show because I think, for example, Lubbock. I think Lubbock is a very interesting character, but the main takeaway that I got from Lubbock was, oh, he just wants to be with women, right? We spent a lot of episodes with Lubbock, but it doesn't. The character itself, greatly performed by Tyler Galindo, does not go beyond the archetype. And I wanted Lubbock could have changed a little bit. Lubbock didn't grow. We spent 20 episodes with Lubbock, and he didn't grow as a character. There was very little development. We got a little bit with Tatsumi, and we got some with Akame, but Akame didn't even get some until the latter half, and if you want to argue, until towards the very end, when she was facing off against her sister. But I just wanted these characters to develop and grow and move beyond being characters and also be people.
Yeah.
And how do these people deal with these problems, as opposed to, oh, I'm so cool, look at how I wave this weapon around, and the only conflict they face are their enemies and not human conflict like themselves or the people around them. There's not enough of that, and there's not enough of what these characters have to go through.
And I think it comes back to exactly what you're talking about, which is normally the structure would look like you get introduced to all these characters one by one. You understand the mission, which takes a few episodes, right?
Yeah.
And then they go on a few missions so that you can see like their strengths and weaknesses. You see them mesh as a group, and then you get you start the arc. You start the changing. You start the morphing into the next thing. You see them run into internal obstacles at the same time as external obstacles. But that in this series was replaced, just like you said, with let's meet the other people.
Yes.
And it was just like, okay, let's meet the next person. Now the next person. Now the next person. And by the time you finished meeting everyone, the show was over.
Yeah.
And so. Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying there, and I would really like to dive into what I think is the biggest drawback for the show for me, but I think that we should dive into it after a quick word from our sponsor. All right, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Now, just let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch more. And third, now this is really important, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hear me when I say no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, and welcome back to the Artenders with Mac and Dan. So where we left off last time was obviously ripping super hard into...
Which is unfair, but like...
But no, I think it's fair. It's our opinion. It's our opinion.
Yes.
Sure.
We see potential, and so...
Absolutely.
And it riles us up.
Right. And we are going to get into... I mean, both more pros and cons, but I wanted to start off with one of the funniest notes that I took.
Okay.
Which, because we take notes throughout everything that we watch or everything that we consume. And so mine verbatim is the character name Mine is a severely inconvenient grammatical name. You know what I mean? Oh gosh. Well, mine was telling me. Oh, it feels just so icky. Whenever you're hearing it out of context, you're like, oh, what is that even?
It's like, that doesn't... Please learn English. What are you doing?
Right. But anyway, so I wanted to get into the biggest... because you were talking about the biggest drawback for you with the show. Yeah. I wanted to get into the biggest drawback for me personally, which is that I don't think that this show has a very good villain. Because...
I agree.
Because specifically, I think that the villain is extremely interesting.
Which villain? So there are multiple villains.
Specifically, because they have a bunch of small villains and everything, and there's Minister, blah, 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 blah.
And you think like the Emperor and the Minister is like the biggest villain of the show, but no, it's like the main antagonist is
the primary story antagonist is Esdeath.
Whose name is Esdeath.
So she is Death. Nice. She, good timing. So, the issue that I have with her is that she is extremely interesting. So every scene that we have where she's involved in the scene, I am extremely interested in, and I'm watching, and I love those scenes. Anytime that she's not in the scene, I'm not worried about her. I'm not scared of her. I'm like, whenever they're like, "Oh, we have to prepare for Esdeath," I'm like, oh, yeah, her. Yeah.
That her character didn't feel like a presence to these characters.
In Berserk, for instance.
Okay.
That is a phenomenal, a freaking priceless villain, I think. The eventual end villain where they're taking on pretty much like the Satan.
Yeah.
And it is... interesting. It's super interesting, and it's really actually scary. And I'm like, I don't think they're gonna make it. And spoiler alert, they don't. But with this, there was never even really a moment. I was never worried. I was never really thinking too hard about it. It was just like, whatever. Until she came up on screen.
I think it goes back to the action and what was the focus on the storytelling. That so let's talk about really fast. We were just throwing in a bunch of different episodes that we discussed. Let's talk about Lovecraft Country.
Okay, yeah, sure.
In the spoiler alert, by the way, in the second episode, George Freeman is killed off.
Yeah.
But you feel George Freeman's presence throughout the rest of the show.
Yeah.
And so much of what the characters do from then on out also has to do with George dying and like doing it for George, right?
Sure.
And you also felt the impact of how important of a character George was before he died, like to these people. And you immediately could tell, okay, George is like a father figure to Tick. And so a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the things that the group is overcoming has to do with George helping solve the problems, right? And so then afterwards, when George dies, you feel his presence. And so you're constantly reminded by these characters and like how they operate in the space. George is no longer with us. When, I think really like, honestly, like the only character that really goes for that is the case in this show is like Bulat. Because Tatsumi is wearing Bulat's armor towards the end. So naturally, and that's really it.
It's just in Curcio, yeah.
And so it's frustrating. It is really, really frustrating.
Yeah.
But like we want more for this character and we want more character development. And so yeah, you don't feel the presence of characters when they're not on screen. And then the issue is also the characters like, I miss this person, and the audience member is left like, but I don't know anything about this person.
Yeah.
Even beforehand. And so I don't know why you miss this person so much, right? Like, so mine, I'm going to keep bringing this up because it happened so early in the season. Once again, I appreciate the gumption this show had for killing off characters so easily. Yes, but I don't know why mine and Shell were like, really were best friends. And I don't know what Shell gave mine, and I don't know what mine gave Shell. And we never get that. Yeah. And it was just where the priority was with this show. And I wanted more actual character.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating. But it's also, to bring it back to Esdeath, really fast.
Yes.
And really, for almost every villain in the show, or every antagonist, I should say, almost every antagonist in the show is creepy.
Yeah.
So that can work sometimes, right? Like having a creepy antagonist and having an off-putting and unsettling
And specifically
antagonist.
sexually creepy.
Yeah,
Pretty much every single one of them.
Yes, having that every once in a while, if like once, can be super duper effective.
Yeah.
Right. And it throws the storytelling and like what these characters have to deal with in a loop. Right. But if you make the Empire and every single person involved so cartoonishly evil and so cartoonishly creepy, then there are hardly any real distinctions between those characters aside from their weapons and how they look,
it's
as
very
opposed
numbing.
to who they are.
Sure.
Right? Because then you have Esdeath, who isn't much different than the executioner you meet at the very beginning of the show,
Right.
where they just love killing and torturing people. It's
Right.
like, okay, but what's the main difference between these characters? Oh, Esdeath wants to love? She doesn't grow. She doesn't.
And at the end of the day, whenever you do that, oh my god, whenever you do that, the characters aren't, or the antagonists aren't actually characters. They're just symbols. They're just representations of the greater problem. Because I think that's really the issue that's had, is that they didn't, the people that wrote it did not have characters in mind. They had a concept in mind. And that concept was interesting, and that would have been okay if they had just stuck to the simple structure of let's learn more about the protagonists than we do about the antagonists. The other, so I'm gonna dive real quick into my sizzle serve.
Hot dog.
Yeah, get ready. Which is what I believe to be the best kill of the show.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of killing people.
Yeah.
And this one was the one that I, like, literally as I was watching it, I said out loud, like, literally out loud, oh, fuck. Like, a little bit to myself.
Yeah.
Was, God, it happens in the second half. Lubbock throws his spear.
Right.
Into like one of the Jaeger's hearts or whatever, like in his chest, and he's like, "Oh, you like that's nothing." I've been
I was
doing
one
this
of the
for decades."
assassins, right?
Yeah,
The Rakshasa
yes.
assassin.
Oh,
yeah.
nice, yeah. Very impressive. And it pierces him, and he's like, "Oh, that's not gonna do anything to me. You need to do better than that." And he's like, "Oh, I will." And then the strings wrap around his heart, and it explodes. Oh, I was like, "Oh, shit!"
The creativity that this
In
show
these-
exhibits,
Yeah, it's
with just these weapons, right? So we have Lubbock, who uses like
Insane.
these wires, right? And you think that's it. No, he also uses it as barriers. He uses it as shields, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And then he transforms it and like molds it, all these wires, into like a spear, throws it, and then the wires get into the person's heart and squish it. Like, that's awesome.
Oh my
dude.
gosh, yeah, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's absolutely brilliant.
And what these characters do with these weapons, and there are 48 of them. I don't know how many we actually go through in the show, but certainly most of them. But a lot of these weapons and how these characters use them and how the show animates them, super duper awesome.
And I think that's actually at the core the best part of the entire show, in my opinion, which is well, the cool weapons, obviously, but specifically that there were a lot of weapons that were controlled by emotion. I mean, in mine, there's literally the emotion, like, gun.
Yeah.
That it's like, however much you feel, that's how much.
I don't think we were ever told that, by the way. I don't think mine ever mentioned in this show that if she's under a high stress situation, that
I
her
don't think
weapon
she ever
becomes more
did.
powerful.
No. I think.
I
that
wish
she
the
should
show
have
would
told
tell us that. Yeah.
I wish that they would have told us every single time that she fired it.
Yeah.
Wait, it did.
No.
Every single time.
We're being mean.
Yeah, this
We're
is so
being really mean.
That's so asshole.
That was uncalled for.
It was fine. It wasn't as bad as we were saying it was.
I'm upset at the original writers of the show.
Sure. But there was that weapon that was powered by emotion and everything, and as Tatsume got more and more intense in his emotions, he evolved. Like the armor evolved, and with every single character, if you really think about it, every one of their weapons was enhanced by this emotional high gear,
which conceptually is so cool, and that's a great device.
Oh my god! Because what it does to scenes and what it does to characters is it tells us that emotion equals power.
Yeah.
emotion and passion especially equals power, and that is a gold mine for character building and for the root of scene work.
Yes.
And so they laid that foundation excellently. Or I guess we can go back to if we really want to, we can go back to the original creator. The original creator, Takahiro, was the one that really conceptually made that genius.
Yeah, and it's really, really smart laying down that foundation, but it's never visited in the way it should in the show.
Sure.
That a lot of times those emotions are just coming from the character about to die, as opposed to like the character personally has stake.
Yes.
In this situation, like a very personal, tangible, real stake. Excuse me. Woo. Also, really fast. I know we left the topic, but I'm being an a-hole, and I'm dragging us, like a tugboat back to the topic. But the issue with the antagonist also is that, if you look at a character, an antagonist, like everyone knows it, Thanos, right? What makes Thanos so interesting is like, I see where you're coming from. I understand what you're trying to do.
Yes, true.
Like from a sympathetic level, I understand. And so then when Thanos goes through hardship, you can feel that hardship because Thanos feels human.
Yes.
And you can feel connected, like, oh, okay, we both agree on something. As opposed to just being like, I want to take over the world. What do you like to do? I like to torture people. That's really boring.
Yeah.
And it's an immediate audience disconnect on your character. And so when you examine antagonists that you sympathize, or better yet, empathize with what they're trying to do.
Yeah, sure.
That it also feels really, really sad and really emotional, even when the antagonist is beaten. And the show tried to do that a little bit with Esdeath being emotionally involved with Tatsumi. But the big thing that really hurt it was like, Esdeath was still this archetype, still this like murdering thing that happens to love Tatsumi, but then Tatsumi never reciprocated. And so when Esdeath died, maybe there could have been a moment of, even though Tatsumi already died at that point, but there could have been a moment of, oh man, like I feel for Tatsumi in this moment. It's just stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
If you give your antagonist humanistic qualities, then we don't have to feel for just the protagonist. Your antagonist can still be cool, but then they can also be people.
And I think that what you're talking about, that's what made the scene so interesting when Tatsumi was trying so hard to make Esdeath human, was trying to get her to come over to the revolution and everything. It was really interesting. But where did it go? Nowhere. At the end of the day, there was never a single moment where she wasn't like, yes, the strong must conquer, and I must kill everything in front of me.
Like Esdeath starts to love Tatsumi, but her fundamentally as a person never changes.
And they even mention at one point, she really, they say she really was in love with Tatsumi. But I guess she just never really understood that, or she never really comprehended that, which is again a really cool concept that is cool on paper and cool in words, but it was not executed.
This show sells to you so much conceptually. And if you watch like the first few episodes, and even though you may not be tied to the story, because honestly I never was, but I was tied to the acting, and I was particularly also really tied to what is this world going to do next. What are we going to see from this world? It's what we experienced with Avatar and with Korra. What is this world going to do? The difference is like those characters were more fleshed out in those shows as opposed to this one. And so, we got some development from Tatsumi. We got it towards the end from Akame, but Leone doesn't really change. Najinda doesn't really change. Mine does change a little bit, but a lot of these characters don't grow. And so you only really enjoy some characters on the show, and there are characters being tossed at you everywhere, right? Like Wave and Bowls, who are like two antagonists that are introduced in the show kind of halfway through. Fantastic characters, because they're not introduced as these archetypes, they're introduced as people with these wants and these human desires.
Yeah.
And like having it be more than just I'm fighting for justice or I'm fighting for torturing people.
Right.
That like Bowles is fighting for his family. And like even though he's done all these bad things, he reminds himself, I have a family at home that loves me, and that's what keeps me going. And that's a superhuman quality that we, for the most part, all can relate to.
Yeah.
And then Wave, not sort of idealistically, but also practically approaching problems of just like, you know, protecting each other and having that be a modus operandi for a lot of what he does, and it just a lot of how he approaches like characters and how he cares about other people. And so it's less about his ideal and more about I want to protect those that I love that are actually around me.
Nice, that was good. The other thing that I was thinking about that really I think brings the show down is that the more we talk about it, the more I'm starting. And I was thinking this in the interview with Molly as well, is that this show is very much very similar to Commedia dell'arte and Kabuki,
Okay.
in that it is very archetype centric. It is very surface level. It's made to be silly and exciting and exaggerated, and not really go much further than that. And
I wasn't sure whether or not this show wanted me to take it seriously in its story.
Right. And the toughest part is that it did.
It did,
By the end, it did.
Yeah.
And so the entire time you're like, I'm not really sure, and that would be okay if at the end you find out it wasn't supposed to be that.
It did feel like the show had a little bit of an identity crisis.
Yeah, sure. Now, may I go on to my gold medal?
Oh yeah, please.
Okay, gold medal with the sound effect and whatever.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, I love the sound effect. Every time I say the words, I think of it.
Yes.
Gold medal is that the music.
The music was fantastic.
The music of the show is fantastic.
It's a shame, honestly, that we got into the music this late into our episode.
Yeah, I know. It really was a game changer. Specifically in scenes, obviously, it was awesome. It really changed a lot of things. I think that what was really awesome, because with the whole theme of emotion is power, right? I love that whenever it got to intense, violent scenes, it wasn't always a matter of faster music. It wasn't always a matter of louder music or electronic music. It was, a lot of the times, they used strings, they used cellos.
It was awesome.
And I was like, oh, I forget. Like, this is you telling me, again, continuously, emotion is power. Whenever you are, them turning a stressful or an action-packed moment into a intense or enlightening or kind of sad moment. That was really impressive. And I also think that one of my favorite parts of the show is whenever episode 15 hit, because do you know what I'm about to say?
No.
Because they changed the theme song.
Oh yeah.
And the
second theme song is fantastic.
Is light years better.
Yeah.
The first theme song, I was like, anime intros are so funny. I was like, why the hell do they always make those really weird intros that have nothing to do with the show? I was like, this doesn't feel like Akame ga Kill at all. But the second intro on episode 15 and on, I was like, okay, this is what the show feels like.
Yeah.
This is the tone of the show, and that is a really spectacular song by itself, even.
Yeah. I like Akame in this show. I think Molly does a great job with
Molly
Akame.
kills.
Especially considering too, that she is in a very tight container. We were talking about it in the interview that Akame is straightforward for a lot of the show. And it's actually, to me, it is nice then to see her grow as the show goes on. And you can't say that for all the characters. With that being said, I also think one of the best things that the show does is actually kill Tatsumi the second to last episode.
Agreed.
And then it becomes about Akame, right?
Finally.
And
the show is called Akame ga Kill. Why?
Right. So listen, I have no issue with Tatsumi being like the protagonist of the show. What I do have an issue with is the show with its intro and its title constantly telling me that it's like really about Akame, but it's not. What the show is about is like this group, right? Either Tatsumi and or the group.
Yeah.
And what this group has to deal with. And so if all of a sudden, you know, we're given the impression that the show is about the group or the show is about Tatsumi, that once we get to the end and Akame is one of the only people that is alive and is facing off against the main antagonist,
right.
then this it can give the moments and the feeling of this it.
Yeah.
You know, the moment of finality of like all your sacrifices are apparent right here and right now, and the stakes are the highest that it's ever been. But the show is constantly reminding you that, hey, this is really about Akame, that I think it robs you a little bit of the opportunity to get to know the other characters as well. And so like when it's just Akame in the end, you don't feel the loss of the other characters, and you don't feel the thought of, man, if only if Akame had Lubbock right next to her, if only she had Tatsumi right next to her, if only she had Bulat right next to her, or Chelsea, or Susanoo. Like, if she had those people around her, man, like, that would help her so much. But it's just her alone, and that storytelling moment could have been so cool if the show wasn't constantly Akame. And this, I'm like, and this not a diss on like the acting at all, but it's because I think, like I said, Molly did a great job, but it's a diss in the storytelling of the show, and where are the priorities? And it's clearly not, the priorities are not, you know, the actual storytelling. The priorities is cool action, and we have this super dope character with Murosame, and she is super dope, but the show should have been more than just that. And that's my big takeaway.
Yeah. I think that was an excellent takeaway.
I did not dislike the show.
Sure.
But I desperately wanted the show to be more.
Yeah.
That, why do we have a character named Dr. Stylish and he's nothing more than creepy and stylish? Why is that his only thing? And why are we introduced to him and get a little bit of backstory with him, and then he dies immediately?
And you know that he was a bigger character in the manga.
Yeah.
We're never going to read it.
Why do we have the second intro have Budo in the middle of it when we know nothing about Budo, and he's only there for 2 episodes and then he's gone? Why are we given these things and given the impression that these characters are important, but the story doesn't treat them, or the storytelling does not treat them as being important? It's really frustrating.
And I don't think there was Tatsume's original 2 friends that he shows up to the capital.
Sayo and somebody else. I forgot his name.
Those 2 characters, I don't think there was ever a moment where I wasn't thinking to myself, wait, who are they? And then they already died before I even got the answers, really.
They occasionally happen. But I appreciate the show every time Tatsumi would bring them up. Yeah. And I'm like, good. Like, that's a big reason why, like, he's
that's a big
here.
Thing for him, absolutely.
And, like, that's something that we experienced with him.
Yeah. And that was kind of cute at the very end whenever like one of the last scenes where they show the villagers with the gold. Yeah. And they're like,
that's emotional payoff.
That really did work.
And, like, them being like, I wonder when all 3 of them are going to come back home.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, shit, man. Yeah. Like, they don't know.
Yes. Okay, so at the end of the day, I definitely don't regret watching the show by any means.
No. And I think the show is really informative also in, like, in storytelling and in characterization and world building. Yeah. The world is awesome. Yes. The world's incredible.
Yes. Which we found very similar with most of the anime we've seen so far. Yeah. And I'm sure it's going to keep being a thing that the worlds are amazing. They're beautiful. And they move at a really cool pace. But it's just until we get that specific storytelling element. You know what I mean? So what are your final words? What would you tell someone going into this? And would you recommend it?
I see the appeal of this show. If I was in middle school and watched this show, I would also love it.
Sure.
Because it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. But I think the show takes itself too seriously. When it too seriously in like, you're supposed to feel something right now, but the show didn't give us enough to actually earn that emotion from the audience. With that being said, it's a fun show to watch. It's one of those shows that I'm having breakfast. I want to watch something. Yeah, sure. Akame got killed, and it's fun to just see what the hell the world does and what the hell happens.
Yeah.
In terms of like storytelling, it's weak. That's where the weakest part is, and like I keep nagging on the storytelling because at the end of the day, that's always the biggest thing, right? And you remember these things because of the stories they tell, right? There is, sometimes like I'll play a game and I played it months ago, but I'm still actively thinking about because of what the story does.
Yeah.
And not so much about how it plays. And so when it's a movie or a TV show, in this case, I want to actively think about the story and be impacted by the story, but I, as a human being, didn't learn anything from it. Mm-hmm. It was basically it was trying to be super duper cool, but I didn't learn anything from it, so I'm not impacted, and then I'm gonna forget about it tomorrow. Even though these actors did a great job, even though the animators did a fantastic job, and I think Takahiro probably in the manga did a fantastic job as well. So like, I recommend some parts of the show. But I was frustrated, and I don't mean to harp on it too much, but I see potential, and it's just frustrating to watch that potential kind of wisp away into the ocean. Mac, what are your final thoughts?
I would definitely recommend it. I mean, I think depending on the person, I think that the style of the show takes it really far. Meaning like if you like this style of show, if you like the style of anime, then I could see why, just like you said, this would be a favorite show of yours. But yeah, it does definitely have a few drawbacks, and I can see why it.
You can see why it's popular and why it has such great appeal.
Definitely see why it has a lot of appeal, and I can and honestly, I am kind of shocked that there hasn't been any like real hardcore push for a season 2. That is kind of shocking to me. I figured that they would.
I would definitely watch a season 2. If I was confident in like improved storytelling of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for nothing else, just because we know for sure they have to bring Molly back.
Yeah, that's true.
But either way, lovely show and a really, really good time made for awesome conversation. So, Danny, what are we? I can safely assume we're watching next week, but what are we watching next week?
The Wire Season 2.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.